Gunfire erupted outside the small adobe house, tearing through the evening calm. Sofia Reyes dropped her colored pencils, her small hands trembling as bullet holes appeared in the living room wall. Ranger, her German shepherd, transformed instantly. From gentle companion to alert sentinel, his body rigid with purpose that seemed impossible for a simple pet. Through her fear, Sofia wondered why her grandfather's dog suddenly looked like he'd done this before. The sound of heavy boots crunching on the gravel driveway sent chills down Sofia's spine. "Check the backyard," a harsh voice commanded in Spanish. The old man said his granddaughter would be alone tonight. Sofia could see flashlight beams sweeping across the windows, men in black masks circling the house like vultures. Her throat tightened with terror, unable to call out for help. Where was Abuelo Miguel? He had only gone to the pharmacy 20 minutes ago. The nearest neighbor lived half a mile away on this remote stretch of New Mexico borderland. The back door handle jiggled violently. Then came the splintering sound of wood giving way under force. Sofia scrambled backward toward the hallway as a tall figure stepped into the kitchen, his face hidden behind a black ski mask, a silver skull pendant glinting at his neck. When he spotted the small 8-year-old pressed against the wall, his eyes narrowed with cruel satisfaction. Well, what do we have here?" he said, stepping closer with a phone in his hand, already recording. "Rafael Morales sends his regards to your grandfather." Behind him, 2 more masked men entered, weapons drawn. A deep, thunderous growl erupted from the shadows of the living room. The man turned just as 90 pounds of German shepherd launched through the air, teeth bared and eyes locked on his threat. In that frozen moment, as Ranger's powerful body collided with the cartel enforcer, only one question remained. Would this loyal protector's instincts be enough to save the child who had no idea her beloved pet had once been the most decorated drug detection K9 in Border Patrol history? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Sofia Alvarez Martinez wasn't like other third graders. While classmates chatted excitedly about soccer games and birthday parties, Sofia observed from a distance, her watchful brown eyes taking everything in, but rarely engaging directly. Diagnosed with selective mutism at age 5, she spoke freely at home, but became virtually silent in public spaces. Words seemed to evaporate from her mind when surrounded by the chaos of school hallways or the curious stares of strangers. Her teachers called her brilliant but unreachable, a mathematical prodigy who could solve complex equations in her head but couldn't raise her hand to answer questions aloud. During group activities, she would stand slightly apart, fingers fidgeting with the frayed edge of her favorite purple sweater, a gift from her mother before she had disappeared 3 years ago. Sofia lived with her grandfather Miguel Alvarez in a modest home 15 miles outside Las Cruces. Their property stood isolated along a dusty stretch of road that saw more coyotes than cars, the distant mountains standing sentinel against the sprawling desert sky. There, in the safety of their small adobe house, with its colorful tile kitchen and walls lined with books, Sofia's voice returned, soft and thoughtful, asking questions about everything from astronomy to her grandmother's old recipes. Miguel had converted the spare bedroom into what he called Sofia's laboratory, filled with telescopes, microscopes, and puzzles designed to challenge her extraordinary mind. He'd taken early retirement from his engineering position to homeschool Sofia when traditional classrooms proved too overwhelming. supplementing her education with weekly visits to museums and monthly trips to the university, where former colleagues allowed her to sit in on selected lectures. Miguel's fierce devotion was unmistakable. "Her mind works differently," he would explain simply to those who inquired. "My job is to give her the space to discover how." Sofia communicated in her own way, through complex drawings, mathematical equations, and music from the violin Miguel had inherited from his own father. When words failed, her bow would speak for her, filling their small home with melodies that conveyed what her voice could not. 3 months ago, Ranger had joined their household, fundamentally altering Sofia's carefully structured world. The German Shepherd had appeared unexpectedly one Sunday morning when Captain Daniela Torres, Miguel's former military colleague, arrived unannounced. "He needs a home, Miguel," Torres had explained on the porch, the dog sitting attentively beside her. "His handler didn't make it back from our last deployment. Medical retirement for both of them, but then James died from his injuries last month." She'd knelt beside the shepherd, her hand resting gently on his head. "Ranger here has nowhere to go. The department can't reassign him. Too much specialized training to start over with a new handler. Between his age and what he's seen, he's done serving." Miguel had hesitated, glancing back toward the house where Sofia peered cautiously through the front window. A child with selective mutism and a traumatized military dog. "I'm not sure that's the best combination, Daniela." Torres had smiled knowingly. "That's exactly why I brought him to you. Ranger isn't just any military dog. He served 2 tours as a drug detection specialist before being reassigned to James. He's trained to remain calm under pressure, to protect without aggression unless commanded, and to provide support for his handler. He senses emotional states most humans miss entirely." She'd lowered her voice. "Besides, James made me promise to find Ranger a home with someone who understood service. Who better than you?" That night, Miguel had explained the situation to Sofia with characteristic directness, giving her the final decision. To his surprise, his usually hesitant granddaughter had considered the dog thoughtfully before nodding her approval. "He's quiet like me," she'd whispered, watching Ranger from across the living room. "And he looks sad in his eyes." The transition hadn't been without challenges. Ranger initially startled at unexpected movements, his training triggering hypervigilant responses to certain sounds, particularly helicopters and fireworks. Miguel recognized the symptoms immediately, the canine equivalent of the PTSD he'd seen in too many comrades. For the first week, Ranger had slept positioned against Sofia's bedroom door, as if standing guard. Miguel would find him there each morning, alert even in rest, his ears twitching at the slightest sound from outside. The behavior had concerned him until he noticed something remarkable. Sofia had begun speaking more frequently, directing full sentences to Ranger when she thought no one was listening. "You can't tell anyone my secrets," he'd overheard her whispering to the shepherd one evening, "but I don't mind if you know them." Ranger had remained perfectly still, his intelligent eyes focused entirely on Sofia's face, offering the unquestioning acceptance she seemed to crave. As weeks passed, subtle changes emerged in both dog and child. Ranger relaxed incrementally, his vigilance transforming from military intensity to protective companionship. Sofia, meanwhile, had started carrying a small notebook to school, writing messages to her teachers when necessary, a communication strategy she'd previously refused despite her therapist's encouragement. Most remarkably, she'd begun sleeping in her own room through the night for the first time since her mother's disappearance. Miguel would find them each morning, Sofia curled under her astronomy-patterned comforter, Ranger, a warm, steady presence at the foot of her bed. Dr. Abigail Winters, Sofia's child psychologist, had been cautiously optimistic during their monthly consultation. Animals can sometimes reach children in ways humans can't, she'd explained, reviewing Sofia's progress notes. They don't demand verbal communication or eye contact. They accept and respond to whatever the child offers. What no one, not Miguel, not Dr. Winters, not even Captain Torres, fully appreciated was the deeply intuitive connection forming between the traumatized military dog and the silent child. Each recognized in the other a kindred spirit navigating a world that demanded conformity to expectations they couldn't meet. In their shared silence, they'd found a language entirely their own. The delicate balance of their newly formed family unit had remained undisturbed until 2 weeks ago, when Miguel received the first threatening letter. Carefully typed, bearing no return address, but unmistakable in its intent. You cannot hide forever, engineer. What you witnessed has not been forgotten. The child will pay for your silence. Miguel had immediately contacted Torres, who arranged for increased patrol presence in their rural area. It's been 15 years, Daniela, he'd said, his weathered hands trembling as he showed her the letter. I testified anonymously. How could they have found me now? Torres had taken the letter with a grim expression. The Morales cartel has a long memory, Miguel. Rafael's son took over the operation last year after his father's extradition. Word is he's determined to settle old scores. She'd glanced toward the kitchen where Sofia sat with Ranger, carefully cutting fruit for their breakfast. Have you told her anything about your past? Miguel shook his head firmly. She knows I worked for the government before engineering. Nothing more. He lowered his voice further. Sofia has already lost her mother. I won't let her carry the weight of my history too. Torres had placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression grave. Then we need to move you both immediately. I can have a safe house arranged by tomorrow. But Miguel had refused, his jaw set with the same stubborn determination that had made him a formidable witness years ago. This is Sofia's home, the only stability she's known since Isabel disappeared. I won't uproot her again, not when she's finally making progress. His eyes had drifted to the doorframe, where pencil marks tracked Sofia's growth alongside dates. A normal childhood ritual he'd fiercely protected will increase security here instead. Torres had reluctantly agreed to a compromise. Panic buttons installed throughout the house, direct lines to local law enforcement, and a retired officer making regular drive-bys of the property. Miguel would consider their options while maintaining Sofia's routine. Neither of them had anticipated how quickly Rafael Morales Jr. would move, nor that someone within law enforcement had already been compromised. The carefully established security protocols meant nothing when Officer Javier Mendez, newly assigned to their area, provided the cartel with Miguel's schedule and confirmed the 20-minute window when Sofia would be alone during his pharmacy run. Now, as gunfire shattered the peaceful evening and masked men breached their home, the world Miguel had so carefully constructed for his granddaughter collapsed in seconds. The truth he'd hidden for 15 years his testimony that had helped dismantle the upper echelon of the Morales cartel and sent Rafael Sr. to a maximum security prison, had finally found them. In the kitchen, Sofia pressed herself against the wall, frozen in terror as 3 armed men advanced. She didn't understand why these men had come, couldn't process the rapid Spanish they shouted to each other. All she knew was that Abuelo wasn't home, that danger had invaded their sanctuary, and that somehow Ranger, her quiet, gentle companion, had transformed into something altogether different. Miguel Alvarez parked his weathered blue pickup truck outside Sandoval's pharmacy, his arthritic fingers tapping impatiently on the steering wheel. The line inside stretched nearly to the door, an unexpected delay that twisted his stomach with worry. He'd promised Sofia he would be gone only 15 minutes, 20 at most. The digital clock on his dashboard now showed he'd already been away for 18. Sofia's medication wasn't something he could skip. The selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors helped manage her anxiety, making her mutism more manageable. But leaving her alone, even with Ranger, always filled him with unease. At 63, Miguel carried the hypervigilance of both a former military engineer and the sole guardian of a vulnerable child. "Mr. Alvarez," Lucia Sandoval called from behind the counter. "Your granddaughter's prescription is ready." Miguel nodded gratefully, making his way past waiting customers. Lucia had always prioritized Sofia's medication, understanding their situation. But today, her usual warm smile was replaced with a tight, concerned expression as she leaned forward. "Miguel," she whispered, glancing around before continuing, "my cousin works dispatch for the sheriff's department. There was a call about suspicious vehicles heading toward your area, black SUVs with tinted windows, no plates, given what happened to the Martinez family last month." She left the implication hanging. The Martinez family, small-time ranchers, who'd refused to allow drug shipments across their land. They'd been found executed, their home burned to the ground. The official report called it a tragic accident, but everyone in the borderland communities knew better. Cold dread washed over Miguel. He grabbed the prescription bag with trembling hands and rushed toward the exit, nearly colliding with Officer Javier Mendez, who was entering the pharmacy. "Whoa there, Mr. Alvarez. Everything all right?" Mendez asked, steadying Miguel with a hand that lingered too long on his shoulder. "Fine, fine," Miguel muttered, avoiding eye contact. Something about the young officer had always struck him as off. Too interested in their routines, too curious about their home security. "Just need to get back to Sofia." Mendez's radio crackled with static, followed by an unintelligible burst of codes. The officer's expression remained neutral, but his eyes gleamed with something that raised the hairs on Miguel's neck. "Sounds like you should hurry home," Mendez said casually. "Never know what might happen out there on those lonely roads." Miguel pushed past him, breaking into a run once outside. As he fumbled with his keys, he glimpsed Mendez in the pharmacy window, speaking urgently into his radio. The officer's gaze was fixed on Miguel, a cold smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The pickup's engine roared to life, tires squealing as Miguel accelerated onto the main road. He grabbed his phone, dialing Sofia's emergency line with one hand while navigating the winding desert highway with the other. No answer. His heart hammered against his ribs as he pressed harder on the accelerator, the speedometer climbing past 80. "Please be okay, mi tesoro," he whispered. "Please be okay." The universe had not been kind to Sofia Alvarez Martinez. Her earliest memories were fragments of warmth and music, her mother's voice singing traditional lullabies, her father's deep laugh rumbling through their small apartment in Albuquerque. These golden moments had shattered irrevocably on her 5th birthday when her father, Antonio Martinez, a cultural anthropologist studying indigenous communities along the border, was killed by a drunk driver while returning home with her birthday cake. Isabel, Sofia's mother, had been devastated but resilient, moving them to Las Cruces to be closer to her father, Miguel. For 2 years, they'd rebuilt their lives, Isabel teaching Spanish literature at the community college, Sofia slowly adjusting to life without her father. They'd developed rituals to keep Antonio's memory alive. Saturday morning pancakes, shaped like the archaeological artifacts he'd loved. Bedtime stories about the indigenous myths he'd documented. Then came the Tuesday when Isabel didn't return from campus. Her car was found abandoned in the faculty parking lot, keys still in the ignition, her lecture notes scattered across the passenger seat. No witnesses, no signs of struggle, no ransom demands. Just inexplicable, complete absence that authorities eventually classified as a presumed homicide, though no body was ever found. The trauma had sealed Sofia's voice like a vault. The once talkative child, who delighted in reciting poetry in both English and Spanish, became selectively mute, speaking only to her grandfather and occasionally to Dr. Winters during their therapy sessions. Words became precious, carefully rationed resources to be spent only when absolutely necessary. Miguel had transformed his retirement to accommodate her needs, converting his engineering mindset to the challenge of raising a traumatized, exceptionally gifted child. He attended workshops on selective mutism, consulted specialists, and created communication systems that didn't rely on verbal expression. He'd become father, mother, teacher, and advocate all at once. The local school district had been ill-equipped to handle Sofia's unique combination of mathematical brilliance and communicative challenges. After a disastrous first semester in public school, where an insensitive teacher had tried to force Sofia to speak by withholding lunch until she verbally asked for it, Miguel had obtained special permission to homeschool her, supplemented by weekly visits from a district educational specialist. Their routine had become carefully calibrated over the years. Mornings devoted to academics, afternoons to creative expression and outdoor exploration. Tuesdays with Dr. Winters. Wednesdays at the University Physics Department, where Professor Ramona Chen allowed Sofia to observe laboratory demonstrations. Thursdays at the local library, where Ms. Harrington had created a special corner with advanced mathematical texts. Despite his best efforts, Miguel knew Sofia's isolation was both protection and prison. She had no friends her age, no relationships outside of the carefully vetted adults in their structured world. The arrival of Ranger had been the first unpredictable element Miguel had allowed into their lives in years, a decision that had caused him considerable anxiety, but which had yielded unexpected benefits. The shepherd had somehow intuited Sofia's boundaries, never forcing interaction, simply existing alongside her until she chose to engage. On their second night together, Miguel had been awakened by Sofia's screams, the recurring nightmare about her mother's disappearance sending her into panic. Before he could reach her room, he'd heard Ranger's distinctive pawing at her door, followed by Sofia's tearful permission to enter. By the time Miguel arrived, Sofia was clutching the dog's fur, her breathing already steadying as Ranger maintained perfect stillness beside her. Dr. Winters had been cautiously optimistic about the bond developing between Sofia and Ranger. Animals, particularly dogs, can serve as emotional bridges, she'd explained during their monthly consultation. Sofia feels safe with Ranger in ways she doesn't with humans because his expectations are different. He doesn't require verbal communication to understand her needs. What Dr. Winters couldn't fully appreciate was the way Ranger seemed to anticipate Sofia's anxiety attacks before physical symptoms manifested. The shepherd would place his body against hers when her breathing patterns subtly changed, applying gentle pressure that helped regulate her nervous system. He somehow knew when to maintain distance and when proximity was needed, an intuitive understanding that even Miguel, with all his devoted attention, couldn't always achieve. Captain Daniela Torres understood more than most. Having worked with military service dogs throughout her career, she recognized that Ranger's behavior went beyond standard training. During her monthly visits to check on the shepherd's adjustment, she observed the nuanced communication between child and dog with professional interest. He's using his detection training with her, Torres had explained to Miguel after witnessing Ranger alert to Sofia's rising anxiety during a particularly difficult math problem. These dogs are taught to recognize minute chemical changes. In Ranger's case, originally for drugs, but the principle applies to stress hormones as well. He's essentially reading her body's signals before she's consciously aware of them. Torres had become an unexpected ally in their isolated existence. As Miguel's former colleague from his classified work with the military, she was one of the few people who knew his full history, including his testimony against the Morales Cartel 15 years ago. When Miguel received the first threatening letter, Torres had immediately mobilized resources despite being officially stationed 3 hours away at Fort Bliss. "You should have told me sooner that you were settling here permanently," she'd admonished during her last visit, reviewing the security measures they'd installed. "This area has changed, Miguel. The cartel influence has expanded since Rafael Jr. took over. The border patrol is undermanned. Local law enforcement is compromised in places. You're too exposed here." Miguel had acknowledged her concerns, but remained adamant. Sofia needs stability. Another move, another loss of the familiar. It could set her back years. His weathered face had softened as he watched Sofia and Ranger through the window, the child carefully brushing the shepherd's coat in the afternoon sun. Besides, who would ever connect a retired engineer and his mute granddaughter to a 15-year-old? Federal case? Torres had fixed him with the steely gaze that had earned her rapid promotion through military ranks. The cartel specializes in making those connections, Miguel. Rafael Sr. might be serving consecutive life sentences, but his son has made it his mission to erase every witness who put him there. She'd hesitated before adding, "There are rumors that someone inside the Justice Department has been selling information from sealed witness files." Miguel had absorbed this with grim resignation. "Then we adapt, increase security, create contingency plans, but we do it without uprooting Sofia." His expression had turned defiant. "I won't let them take another thing from her. She's lost enough." Torres had reluctantly agreed to his terms, arranging for increased border patrol presence near their property and implementing a check-in system where Miguel would send daily coded text messages confirming their safety. She'd also upgraded Ranger's service vest to include a GPS tracker and emergency alert function that could be activated with a specific command. If anything happens, anything at all. You trigger Ranger's alert and get Sofia to the safe room, Torres had instructed, demonstrating the reinforced door they'd installed in Miguel's home office. The alert will come directly to my team. We can be here in 20 minutes by helicopter. What neither of them had considered was the possibility of an attack during the narrow window when Miguel left for Sofia's medication, or that Officer Mendez, recently assigned to their rural district, had already been compromised by cartel money. The carefully orchestrated security measures assumed threats would come with warning, that Miguel would be present to implement their emergency protocols, that Sofia would never face danger alone. Now, as Miguel's truck raced along the desert highway, the setting sun casting long shadows across the landscape, all their careful planning unraveled. His phone remained silent, Sofia's emergency line unanswered. The distant sound of helicopters echoed across the valley, but Miguel knew, with sickening certainty, they weren't Torres' security response. The cartel often used unmarked helicopters for operations in remote areas, their distinctive sound a harbinger of violence that border communities had learned to fear. 10 miles from home, Miguel finally spotted what confirmed his worst fears. 2 black SUVs with tinted windows parked haphazardly at the turnoff to their property, a third vehicle continuing down the main road as if on patrol. Even from a distance, he could see armed men establishing a perimeter, their movements displaying military precision that no ordinary criminal organization could match. Miguel killed his headlights and veered off onto a maintenance track he'd carefully memorized, but never thought he'd need. The rough path would take him to the back of their property, approaching from the blind side of the arroyo that ran behind their home. If he could reach Sofia and Ranger, get them to the safe room, if it wasn't already too late. His only hope now lay in the training of a retired military dog who had never been intended as protection, and in the resilience of a traumatized child who had already endured more loss than most adults. Miguel pressed harder on the accelerator, the truck bouncing violently over the rutted terrain as darkness descended fully upon the desert. Ranger hadn't always been called Ranger. 6 years ago, when he first entered the rigorous Border Patrol K9 training program, his designation had been simply K9 Unit 7853, a number tattooed inside his left ear. Born to a carefully selected bloodline of working German shepherds, his genetic heritage predisposed him to the rare combination of traits needed in elite detection dogs: exceptional scent discrimination, physical endurance, unwavering focus, and the temperament to remain calm under extreme pressure. His first handler, Agent Carlos Mendoza, had given him the name Ranger during their initial bonding week. "You patrol these borders like a Texas Ranger from the old days," Mendoza had told the young shepherd, scratching behind his ears after a particularly successful training exercise. "Vigilant, determined, impossible to distract from your mission." Name had stuck, becoming official in Ranger's service records. For 4 years, Ranger and Mendoza had worked the most challenging sections of the southern border. Remote desert corridors where drug mules traversed treacherous terrain to avoid official crossing points. Their success rate had been legendary within the department. Over 3,000 kilos of narcotics intercepted, 17 high-value couriers apprehended, 0 false alerts. Then came Operation Scorpion Tail, a coordinated multi-agency strike against a major supply route operated by the Morales cartel. Intelligence had indicated a historic shipment moving through the Chihuahuan desert, but the information had been deliberately leaked. Instead of finding drugs, Ranger and Mendoza's team walked into an ambush. The firefight lasted less than 6 minutes. 3 agents died immediately. Mendoza took 2 bullets shielding Ranger, who, despite a graze wound to his shoulder, dragged his handler 200 yards to the extraction point. Mendoza survived, but never returned to field duty, his spine permanently damaged. Ranger was reassigned to military operations, his extraordinary detection abilities redirected toward explosive ordnance in Afghanistan. There, he was paired with Sergeant James Cooper, an experienced handler who recognized the shepherd's exceptional talents, but also the invisible wounds he carried. Cooper spent their first month simply rebuilding Ranger's trust, allowing the dog to sleep near his cot, speaking to him constantly in a low, steady voice. Under Cooper's patient guidance, Ranger completed 2 tours overseas, earning multiple commendations for detecting buried IEDs that saved countless lives. Photos of the shepherd wearing his protective gear appeared in military publications, his focused expression and alert posture becoming something of a symbol for the K9 units deployed in combat zones. What these articles never captured was the bond that formed between handler and dog, how Cooper would share his limited rations with Ranger during extended missions, how the shepherd would position himself between Cooper's sleeping bag and the tent entrance each night, how they communicated through a series of subtle signals nearly invisible to observers. Their final mission had begun like many others, an intelligence-driven sweep of a suspected Taliban weapons cache near a small village. Ranger had detected explosive material in an abandoned structure, alerting Cooper with his trained passive response, freezing in place, his body rigid with certainty. As the team prepared to secure the area, a secondary device detonated. Cooper had thrown himself over Ranger, absorbing the blast that would have killed the shepherd instantly. Both were evacuated under heavy fire. Both survived the initial trauma. Both received honorable medical discharges. Cooper's injuries were catastrophic. 3rd-degree burns over 60% of his body, massive internal damage, traumatic brain injury. The prognosis was grim from the start. For 6 months, Ranger had accompanied Cooper through grueling rehabilitation at Walter Reed Medical Center, where doctors had been amazed by the dog's intuitive understanding of his handler's needs. Ranger would alert nurses to changes in Cooper's condition before monitoring equipment detected them, would apply gentle pressure to his uninjured side during phantom pain episodes, would rest his head on Cooper's chest during panic attacks, seemingly synchronizing their breathing. Captain Daniela Torres had met them during this period, while visiting wounded soldiers from her former unit. She'd been immediately struck by the extraordinary connection between the man and dog, spending hours documenting their interaction, patterns for a military study on service animal integration. He's not just trained, Cooper had explained to Torres during one of their conversations. He understands. When the pain gets bad, he knows exactly where to place his body to help. When I'm having a flashback, he brings me back better than any medication they've tried. Cooper's damaged face had managed a smile. The nurses say his heart rate synchronizes with mine when I'm in distress. They've never seen anything like it. When Cooper succumbed to his injuries, his will had contained explicit instructions regarding Ranger. Find him someone who needs his gifts, not just another handler or a symbolic retirement to a display home. Someone who truly needs what he can do. This directive had led Torres to Miguel Alvarez's doorstep with a 5-year-old German shepherd who had seen more combat than most decorated soldiers, who had been trained in sophisticated detection and protection protocols. who had developed an almost supernatural ability to read human physiological states and who now had nowhere to go. What Torres hadn't fully disclosed to Miguel was Ranger's complete operational history. The details of his cartel-related work remained classified. His encounters with Morales' operations redacted from the records she shared. She'd mentioned only his military service, his medical retirement, and his exceptional capacity for emotional support work. "He's good with traumatized individuals," she'd explained simply. "Something about them speaks to his own experience." Torres couldn't have anticipated the particular alchemy that would occur between Ranger and Sofia, how the shepherd's hypervigilance would find constructive purpose in monitoring the child's anxiety levels, how his training in detecting chemical changes would translate to recognizing the subtle shifts preceding Sofia's panic attacks, how his protective instincts would find renewed purpose in guarding a vulnerable child. For Sofia, Ranger represented something she'd never experienced: unconditional acceptance without expectation of verbal response. Adults in her life, however, well-meaning, always carried the subtle hope that today might be the day she would speak. Their encouraging smiles when she nodded instead of answering, their carefully hidden disappointment when written notes replaced conversation, all registered in Sofia's hyper-aware consciousness. Ranger expected nothing, demanded nothing. He simply existed alongside her, alert to her needs without requiring explanation. This silent partnership had begun gradually, with Sofia maintaining careful distance during Ranger's first days in their home. She observed him with scientific precision, noting his behaviors in the small notebook she carried everywhere. R sleeps facing door. R inspects perimeter of house 3x daily. R alerts to Abuelo's approach 2 minutes before car sounds. R maintains constant visual contact even when appearing to rest. On the 5th night, during a violent thunderstorm that had always triggered Sofia's sensory sensitivities, the true nature of their connection began to emerge. Miguel had been preparing for the usual routine: weighted blanket, noise cancelling, headphones, blackout curtains drawn tight against lightning flashes. But before the storm reached its peak, Ranger had positioned himself beside Sofia's reading chair, pressing his substantial weight gently against her legs. The pressure, similar to the therapeutic weight of her sensory blanket, but somehow more effective, had an immediate calming effect. When thunder cracked directly overhead, Ranger had placed his head in Sofia's lap, creating a focal point that drew her attention away from the overwhelming sensory input. For the first time since her mother's disappearance, Sofia had weathered a thunderstorm without retreat to her closet's safe space, without tears, without the crushing anxiety that typically accompanied such events. Miguel, observing quietly from the doorway, had witnessed a milestone he'd thought might be years away. After that night, Sofia's relationship with Ranger evolved rapidly. She began including him in her careful routines, adjusting her schedule to accommodate his needs alongside her own. Her notebook entries shifted from observational to interactive. R&I practiced mathematics today. He listens better than humans. R seems to understand prime numbers, tilts head differently when I recite them. Miguel noticed that Sofia had begun speaking more frequently in Ranger's presence. At first, only when they were alone, later even when Miguel was nearby. The words emerged tentatively at first, like dormant seeds testing spring soil after a long winter. Ranger, coefficient, she would whisper, showing the shepherd a complex equation. It means a number we use as a multiplier. Ranger would maintain perfect attention, his intelligent eyes fixed on Sofia's face, ears slightly forward in listening posture, creating a judgment-free audience for her emerging voice. Dr. Winters had been cautiously optimistic about these developments. During their monthly sessions, Ranger provides consistent, predictable feedback without social pressure, she'd explained to Miguel. For children with selective mutism, removing the anxiety around verbal communication is essential to progress. Ranger doesn't exhibit micro-expressions of impatience or expectation that humans inevitably display. The most remarkable aspect of their bond, however, was Ranger's apparent ability to anticipate Sofia's needs. The shepherd seemed to know when Sofia required deep pressure during sensory overload, when she needed space during problem-solving, when gentle nudging might encourage her past social hesitation. This wasn't simply trained behavior. It was adaptive, intuitive, almost prescient. What neither Miguel nor Dr. Winters fully understood was that Ranger was applying his sophisticated detection training to Sofia's biochemistry. The subtle changes in her scent profile before anxiety attacks, the microscopic shifts in her breathing patterns before sensory overload, the almost imperceptible muscle tensions that preceded emotional withdrawal, all registered in Ranger's extraordinary olfactory system with the same clarity that had once allowed him to detect narcotics hidden inside vehicle gas tanks or explosives buried beneath rocky soil. For Sofia, this created an unprecedented experience of being truly seen and understood without verbal communication. For Ranger, it provided the purposeful work essential to his psychological well-being after losing his handler. Their wounds, though different in origin, complemented each other in a healing symbiosis neither had experienced before. The transformation was gradual but undeniable. 3 weeks after Ranger's arrival, Sofia had voluntarily attended a small gathering at Professor Chen's laboratory, her first social event in over a year. With Ranger beside her, she had remained for the entire presentation, even approaching the demonstration table afterward to examine the geology specimens on display. 2 months in, she had begun accompanying Miguel to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings, a sensory environment that had previously been overwhelmingly challenging. With Ranger creating a buffer between Sofia and the crowded stalls, she navigated the space with newfound confidence, even handing a written note to their favorite apple vendor requesting a specific variety. By the 3rd month, Sofia had started, bringing Ranger to her weekly sessions with Dr. Winters, where the shepherd's presence enabled conversations that had previously been impossible. Sitting with her hand buried in Ranger's fur, Sofia spoke about her mother for the first time since the disappearance, describing memories she had kept carefully guarded for 3 years. "Mama liked cinnamon on everything," she had whispered. Her voice so soft, Dr. Winters had to lean forward to hear. "Even scrambled eggs. Abuelo makes them without it, because it makes him sad." These breakthroughs had convinced Miguel that bringing Ranger into their home had been the right decision despite his initial reservations. The shepherd had become an essential thread in the fabric of their small family. His protective presence, a constant reassurance. What Miguel could never have anticipated was how Ranger's specialized military training, the classified aspects Taurus had carefully omitted from his service record, would become their only hope for survival when the cartel finally located the key witness whose testimony had sent Rafael Morales Sr. to prison for life. Now, as armed men breached their home and Sofia faced danger alone. Ranger's transition from therapeutic companion to protective guardian occurred with seamless efficiency. The dog, who had spent months gently supporting a traumatized child's recovery, instantly accessed combat protocols, embedded through years of intensive training. As the first intruder advanced toward Sofia, Ranger's assessment was instantaneous and comprehensive. Threat classification, tactical positioning, protective response. The shepherd, who had never so much as growled in Sofia's presence, transformed into the elite service animal who had once cleared buildings in Kandahar and intercepted cartel shipments along the border. His initial strike was calculated with precision, powerful, enough to neutralize the immediate threat, but controlled to minimize collateral damage in the confined space. The man recording with his phone went down hard, the device skittering across the kitchen floor as Ranger maintained pressure on his chest, teeth positioned with tactical precision near the throat without breaking skin. A trained compliance. Hold that immobilized without lethal force. Sofia remained frozen against the wall, her mind struggling to reconcile the gentle companion who listened to her mathematics with this fierce protector executing what was clearly specialized training. In that moment of dissonance, as two more armed men entered through the broken door, Sofia realized there was much more to Ranger's history than her grandfather had shared. Rafael Morales Jr. sat in the climate-controlled comfort of his modernist office overlooking Juarez, the border city's lights spreading below like a constellation against the desert darkness. At 34, he possessed his father's calculating intelligence and ruthless ambition, but none of the elder Morales' restraint or strategic patience. Where Rafael Sr. had built the cartel methodically over decades, Rafael Jr. had accelerated operations since taking control, determined to establish his own legacy rather than merely maintaining his father's empire. The room was deliberately sparse. Polished concrete floors, custom steel furniture, a single abstract painting worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. No family photos adorned the space, no personal mementos suggested sentimentality. The only decoration of note was a glass display case containing his father's vintage silver revolver, the weapon that had established the Morales name in the early days of their organization. "Tell me again about the engineer," Rafael instructed, not looking up from the intelligence report spread across his desk. "And this time, include the details your men apparently found insignificant 15 years ago." Guillermo Vega, the cartel's head of security and one of the few remaining members, from his father's inner circle, shifted uncomfortably. At 57, Vega had survived 3 leadership transitions and numerous internal purges, his longevity attributed to exceptional competence rather than loyalty. He understood better than most the dangerous uncertainty of serving a leader determined to escape his predecessor's shadow. Miguel Alvarez was a military engineer assigned to a joint border security task force from 2004 to 2008, Vega explained, his voice carefully modulated to convey factual precision without defensiveness. His official role involved designing sensor systems for detecting underground tunnels, but intelligence suggests he was actually developing advanced chemical detection technology. Rafael looked up sharply. "Chemical detection? For what purpose specifically?" "For identifying the signature compounds in our product, even through sophisticated concealment methods," Vega confirmed. The technology he helped develop eventually became standard in K-9 training programs along the border, dramatically increasing interdiction rates. Raphael's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. So, not just a witness to the San Cristobal operation, a direct contributor to the capabilities that compromised our primary transportation network. Correct. But his testimony was what ultimately provided the RICO predicates for your father's indictment, Vega continued. Alvarez had infiltrated the technical side of our operation through a university connection, Professor Rojas, if you recall, who was consulting on our chemical refinement processes. Rojas, Raphael repeated, the name triggering a flicker of recognition, the one found in pieces along Highway 11. Vega nodded. Your father's last directive before his arrest. But Alvarez had already entered witness protection by then. The Justice Department buried his identity so deeply that even our federal contacts couldn't locate him. He hesitated before adding, until recently. Raphael leaned back in his chair, fingertips pressed together in a gesture reminiscent of his father. And now we find him living quietly, with a mute granddaughter and a dog, in a house that wouldn't even qualify as servant quarters for our family. A cold smile played across his features. How remarkably humble for someone who destroyed a billion-dollar empire. The derision in Raphael's tone masked a deeper, more personal rage. His father's arrest had occurred during Raphael Jr.'s first semester at Harvard Business School, where he'd been studying to bring legitimate corporate structure to the family enterprise. The extradition had been international news, the Morales name suddenly toxic in the circles Raphael had worked so diligently to enter. His carefully constructed dual identity, cartel prince and promising business student, had collapsed overnight. The granddaughter complicates things, Vega noted cautiously. She's 8 years old, selectively mute due to trauma after her mother's disappearance 3 years ago. Disappeared? Raphael's eyebrow arched with interest. By us? No, Vega responded definitively. We had no knowledge of Alvarez's identity or location at that time. According to local police reports, Isabel Alvarez Martinez was a professor at the community college. Her car was found abandoned, but no body was ever recovered. The case remains open but inactive. Raphael drummed his fingers against the polished surface of his desk. Interesting. So the old man has already lost his daughter. Poetic, considering. How many families he destroyed with his testimony. His expression hardened. The girl is not our concern. This is about sending a message to those who betrayed my father and to anyone who might consider cooperating with authorities in the future. There is one other complication, Vega added, his tone suggesting he had deliberately saved this information for last. Recent surveillance indicates the household includes a retired military working dog, a German shepherd with an extensive service record. Our contact in local law enforcement believes it's the same animal that was partnered with Agent Mendoza during Operation Scorpion Tail. Raphael went completely still, recognition flickering in his eyes. Operation Scorpion Tail had been the first major blow to the cartel under his father's leadership. An ambush turned against its planners, but at significant cost. The distinctive German shepherd that had dragged its wounded handler to safety had featured prominently in Border Patrol publicity afterward, becoming something of a symbol for the Joint Counter-Narcotics Task Force. That dog should be dead, Raphael stated flatly. It's been, 6 years since Scorpion Tail? 5 years and 8 months, Vega confirmed. The animal was reassigned to military service overseas after Mendoza's injury, then medically retired. Captain Daniela Torres facilitated its placement with Alvarez approximately 3 months ago. Torres, Rafael repeated, mentally cataloging the name. The same Torres who led the tactical team that captured my father's second-in-command. One and the same, Vega affirmed. She maintains regular contact with Alvarez and has arranged enhanced security measures for the property. Our source indicates she visits monthly, presumably to check on the dog's adjustment. Rafael's expression transformed as the pieces aligned in his mind, a predatory satisfaction replacing his earlier irritation. So we have not just the engineer who designed the technology that compromised our smuggling routes and testified against my father, but also the decorated K9 that became the face of border interdiction efforts, placed there by one of the key tactical officers involved in dismantling our organization. He gave a short, humorless laugh. It's like they've conveniently assembled a museum exhibit of everyone who destroyed my inheritance. Vega remained silent, recognizing the dangerous current now running beneath Rafael's controlled exterior. The younger Morales had rebuilt the Cartel with brutal efficiency after his father's extradition, but his leadership was marked by a personal vindictiveness that the elder Morales had never displayed. Where Rafael Sr. had eliminated enemies as business necessities, Rafael Jr. seemed to derive particular satisfaction from orchestrating elaborate retribution. Tell me about the team you've assembled for this operation, Rafael directed, his attention returning to the dossier before him. 8 men divided into 3 units, Vega explained, shifting into tactical briefing mode. Team 1 will secure the perimeter and manage potential interference from neighbors, though the isolated location makes this unlikely. Team 2 will enter the residence and secure the primary target, along with gathering any intelligence materials that might be present. Team 3 will remain mobile, monitoring police channels and prepared to intercept any response from local authorities. And Officer Mendez, Rafael inquired, his position is secure. He's been on our payroll for 14 months, originally providing intelligence on border patrol movements. When he transferred to the sheriff's department and recognized Alvarez from his file, he made the connection and alerted us immediately. Vega's tone suggested professional approval. He's confirmed the time window when the girl will be alone, except for the dog, while Alvarez collects her medication from town. Rafael nodded slowly, mentally evaluating the plan against potential variables. The dog concerns me, he finally said. Even retired, a trained K9 with combat experience could be problematic. We've accounted for that, Vega assured him. Eduardo has specialized equipment for neutralizing service animals, sonic devices that cause disorientation without leaving forensic evidence. The dog will be incapacitated before it can present any significant threat. Rafael considered this. Information then reached a decision. I want the operation recorded, not just surveillance footage. I want the girl's reaction when she realizes what's happening. I want the dog's attempts to protect her captured clearly. His voice remained perfectly level, revealing nothing of the emotional satisfaction he anticipated. My father should see exactly what happens to those who betrayed him, even from his cell. Understood, Vega confirmed, making a note on his tablet. Will ensure comprehensive documentation. And the girl? Vega asked delicately, addressing the question Rafael had deliberately left unanswered. Rafael's expression remained impassive. As I said, she's not our primary concern. but her presence serves a purpose in the broader message we're sending. He paused, then added with calculated precision, "Her fate should match her mother's. Let the authorities add another unsolved disappearance to their files." Vega absorbed this directive without visible reaction, though inwardly he noted the escalation it represented. The Morales cartel had always operated with strategic violence, but deliberately targeting a child crossed a line that even Rafael Sr. had generally observed. This order confirmed what many in the organization had privately suspected, that Rafael Jr.'s personal vendettas were increasingly driving operational decisions, potentially compromising the business-oriented approach that had sustained the cartel through previous periods of scrutiny. "Timeline for execution?" Vega inquired, redirecting the conversation to practical matters. "Tonight," Rafael responded without hesitation. "Our source confirms Alvarez will be collecting the prescription at 6, leaving approximately 20 minutes to complete the primary objective before his return." He closed the dossier with a decisive motion. "I want confirmation by 9 p.m. Vega nodded, rising to leave. At the door, he paused. "Should we expect you at the celebration afterward? The men would consider it an honor." Rafael considered the invitation momentarily. These operational aftermath gatherings were tradition under his father's leadership, a way to build loyalty and camaraderie among the foot soldiers who undertook the cartel's most dangerous work. Rafael Jr. had maintained the practice more from strategic necessity than personal inclination, finding these events tediously provincial compared to the sophisticated social circles he preferred. "Perhaps briefly," he conceded, recognizing the political value of an appearance. "This operation marks a significant closure. 15 years of an open account finally settled." After Vega departed, Rafael moved to the window overlooking the cityscape, the border's artificial division marked by the contrasting densities of light, Juarez's chaotic brilliance against El Paso's ordered grid. This arbitrary line had shaped his family's fortune, creating the economic disparities and legal discontinuities that made their business model possible. His father had understood this border as a practical opportunity, approaching its exploitation with the dispassionate calculation of a natural resource developer. Rafael Jr. viewed it differently, as an unjust constraint imposed by foreign powers, a symbolic affront to the regional influence that should rightfully belong to families like his. The operation against Miguel Alvarez represented more than simple revenge. It was Rafael's declaration of territorial sovereignty, an assertion that neither legal boundaries nor federal protections could shield those who challenged the Morales authority. The message would resonate through both enforcement agencies and competing organizations. Rafael Morales Jr. could reach anyone, anywhere, at any time of his choosing. He activated the secure communication channel on his custom-encrypted phone. "Is the team in position?" he inquired without preamble. "Affirmative," came the immediate response. "Alvarez departed for town 6 minutes ago. Team 2 is approaching the residence now. And Mendez, in position to intercept any emergency response. He's monitoring dispatch channels directly." Rafael permitted himself a small, satisfied smile. "Proceed as planned. I expect a full report." By 9, he disconnected without waiting for acknowledgement, his attention returning to the borderlands sprawled below. From this height, national boundaries dissolved into insignificance. It was all Morales territory in the landscape of power that truly mattered. In his climate-controlled office, Raphael couldn't hear the surveillance helicopter already circling toward the Alvarez property, couldn't see the black SUVs positioning themselves along approach routes, couldn't know that his carefully orchestrated vengeance was about to encounter two variables his intelligence had critically underestimated. A German shepherd with combat instincts intact despite retirement, and a selectively mute child whose trauma response had prepared her for precisely this kind of crisis. While Raphael contemplated the symbolic significance of his operation, Sofia Alvarez was experiencing the terrifying reality of it. Armed men. In her home, her grandfather absent and her silent companion suddenly transformed into something she barely recognized. As the first intruder fell beneath Ranger's precision strike, Sofia's analytical mind began processing what her eyes were, witnessing not random aggression, but tactical response, not a pet defending territory, but a trained operator executing protocols. When the second and third men entered with weapons drawn, Sofia made a connection that would fundamentally alter the unfolding scenario. The emergency procedure drills her grandfather had insisted they practice monthly weren't hypothetical safety precautions. They were preparation for this specific threat. The safe room wasn't general disaster readiness. It was designed for this exact situation. And Ranger, gentle, attentive Ranger, who listened to her mathematics and calmed her sensory overload, was not simply a retired service dog with trauma similar to hers. He was a specifically placed protective asset with capabilities she was only now witnessing. For the first time since her mother's disappearance, Sofia felt the paralyzing fog of trauma response lifting, replaced by a clarity born from recognizing patterns. These men wanted to hurt her grandfather. Ranger was fighting to protect her, and somewhere in the emergency protocols Miguel had drilled into her was the solution to surviving until help could arrive. As Rafael Morales Jr. awaited reports of his operation's success, the 8-year-old girl he had dismissed as an incidental complication was remembering the specific command sequence her grandfather had taught her. The words that would activate Ranger's emergency protocol and the precise location of the hidden panel that would open their safe room. The cartel leader, who prided himself on accounting for every variable, had overlooked the most significant one. Sofia Alvarez Martinez was not simply a traumatized, selectively mute child. She was the granddaughter of a military engineer who had spent 3 years preparing for exactly this scenario. Time compressed for Sofia as the scene unfolded with terrifying speed. Ranger maintained his hold on the first intruder, a precision, a technique that immobilized without killing, a calculated restraint that further confirmed his specialized training. The man struggled beneath the shepherd's weight, cursing in Spanish and English as he attempted to dislodge the animal without success. The 2 additional cartel enforcers responded with practiced coordination, separating to approach from different angles. The taller one motioned toward Sofia, his intent clear: secure the child as leverage. The second man focused on Ranger, reaching into his tactical vest to withdraw what appeared to be a small electronic device. "Get the dog with the sonic," the tall one ordered in accented English, clearly wanting Sofia to understand their intentions. "Boss wants this recorded. Make sure you get the animal's reaction when you hit him with it." Sofia's analytical mind processed this information with sudden clarity. They knew about Ranger's background. They had come prepared with specialized equipment to neutralize him. This was not random violence, but a precisely targeted operation. The man with the device adjusted a dial, his movements betraying familiarity with the equipment. "Covering your ears won't help the dog, little girl," he said, noticing Sofia's protective gesture. "This frequency is designed specifically for canine hearing. Military grade. Your precious pet will be crippled in seconds." Sofia knew he was right. From her extensive reading on service animals, she understood that dogs' hearing operated at frequencies far beyond human perception. A sonic weapon calibrated to those frequencies would cause excruciating pain without affecting the human operators. Ranger would be defenseless. The emergency training her grandfather had drilled into her surfaced through her fear. Miguel had created a simple protocol, knowing that stress would compromise complex recall. 3 steps. Command, movement, security. Command first. The phrase needed to be delivered clearly without hesitation. "Ranger, code Sierra," Sofia said, her voice emerging with unexpected steadiness after months of near silence. The specialized command, one Miguel had insisted she practice weekly, was designed to trigger Ranger's emergency response programming. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Ranger released his hold on the first intruder and pivoted towards Sofia, his entire demeanor shifting into what military handlers would recognize as operational assault protection mode. The change was so profound, it momentarily froze the cartel. Enforcers, who had expected to face a retired service animal, not a fully engaged combat asset. Step 2. Movement. Sofia turned toward the hallway that led to her grandfather's office, toward the hidden safe room concealed behind what appeared to be an ordinary bookcase. "Ranger, with me," she commanded, employing another phrase from their emergency drills. The shepherd positioned himself between Sofia and the armed men, backing up in perfect synchronization with her movement toward the hallway, maintaining protective coverage while enabling retreat. This was not simple animal instinct, but tactical maneuvering that revealed thousands of hours of specialized training. The man holding the sonic device recovered from his surprise and lunged forward, thumb pressing the activation button. A high-pitched whine filled the air, imperceptible to Sofia, but obviously agonizing to Ranger, whose ears flattened instantly against his skull. The shepherd faltered momentarily, a shudder running through his powerful frame. The cartel enforcer smiled with cruel satisfaction. "Not so tough now, police dog," he taunted, advancing confidently. "Soon you'll be begging us to put a bullet in your head." What happened next would later be described in the official Border Patrol report as exceptional threat adaptation, consistent with elite service animal training. Despite the debilitating sonic assault, Ranger launched himself directly at the device, his trajectory precisely calculated. Teeth closed around the man's wrist with controlled pressure. Not the killing force Ranger had been trained to deliver in combat scenarios, but enough to trigger the man's reflex response. The sonic device clattered to the floor. Before it could be retrieved, Ranger knocked it across the room with his paw in a deliberate motion that sent it sliding under the heavy refrigerator, effectively removing the primary threat to his operational capacity. The taller enforcer abandoned subtlety, drawing his weapon and aiming directly at Ranger. "Enough games. We take the girl and finish the dog." Sofia felt terror constricting her chest, threatening to freeze her in place. The third step, security, seemed impossibly distant. They would never reach the safe room now, not with armed men blocking their path. Then headlights swept across the front windows as a vehicle pulled into the driveway. All 3 intruders tensed, attention momentarily diverted by the unexpected arrival. Sofia recognized the distinctive sound of Officer Mendez's patrol car, the local policeman who frequently drove past their property during his rounds. "Police," the first man hissed, struggling to his feet. Blood stained his tactical vest, where Ranger's initial takedown had slammed him against the kitchen island. Mendez was supposed to keep them away. "It is Mendez, fool," the tall one snapped back, after glancing through the window. "He's part of the operation." Sofia's momentary hope collapsed. Even the local police were involved with these men. The realization brought a crushing weight of isolation. No one was coming to help them. Her grandfather was too far away. "Captain, Torres wouldn't know anything was wrong until it was too late." Through the window, Sofia could see Officer Mendez approaching the house with deliberate casualness, his uniform creating a facade of legitimacy should any neighbors happen to observe. He glanced toward the black SUVs partially concealed behind the storage shed, then proceeded to the front door, knocking with the familiar rhythm he used during routine property checks. "Police welfare check," he called out, voice pitched to carry, to potential observers. "Just making sure everything's all right in there, Sofia," the tallest enforcer gestured sharply to his companions. "New plan, Cruz, get the girl into the back room. Eduardo, help me deal with Mendez. We need to maintain our timeline." Sofia recognized her narrowing window of opportunity. With the men momentarily focused on coordinating their response to Mendez's arrival, she made a decision that contradicted her instinctive caution. Instead of continuing toward the safe room, she darted sideways into the kitchen, dropping to her knees beside her special backpack, the emergency kit Miguel had insisted she keep stocked and accessible. "Stupid girl," Cruz snarled, lunging toward her. "There's nowhere to run." Ranger intercepted him with military precision, positioning his body as a barrier while Sofia unzipped the side pocket of the backpack with trembling fingers. Inside lay exactly what Miguel had placed there 3 months ago. A compact emergency beacon designed to activate a silent alarm at Border Patrol headquarters, where Captain Torres maintained a direct line to their security protocol. Sofia pressed the activation switch just as Cruz shoved past Ranger and grabbed her arm with bruising force. The beacon emitted a single confirming beep before lighting a steady red indicator. Signal transmitted. "What was that?" Cruz demanded, yanking Sofia to her feet. "What did you activate?" Sofia retreated into silence, her selective mutism reasserting itself under extreme stress. But her eyes betrayed her, darting briefly toward the beacon still, clutched in her hand. Cruz tore it from her grasp, examining it with growing alarm. "They have a panic button," he shouted to the others. "Some kind of alert system." The tall enforcer turned from his position by the door, face contorting with rage. "Destroy it, now!" Cruz smashed the device against the countertop, but the steady red light continued glowing. These beacons were designed to withstand extreme conditions. A simple impact wouldn't disable the transmission. "Too late," Sofia whispered, finding her voice again as patterns crystallized in her mind. "Captain Torres knows." The name visibly impacted the men, recognition flashing across their features. Their operational intelligence had identified Torres as a potential complication, but they had planned around her scheduled visit cycle. Her unexpected involvement accelerated their exposure risk dramatically. Outside, Officer Mendez continued his performance. "Sofia, is everything okay in there? I'm going to need to come in and check if you don't answer." The tall enforcer made a rapid decision. Change of plans. Grab the girl, eliminate the dog. We're extracting now. He activated his radio, voice tense with controlled urgency. Team 1, prepare for immediate departure, potential compromise. Team 3, monitor for inbound tactical response. Crews seized Sofia roughly, lifting her small body with ease. What about the recording? Boss wanted footage. The operation is blown, the tall one snapped. Priority is extracting with the primary. And leverage. The girl comes with us. We'll deal with the grandfather when he returns. Sofia's mind raced through potential responses, cataloging and discarding options with the rapid processing that had always set her apart academically. Running was impossible. Fighting was futile given the physical disparities. The safe room was now out of reach. In this moment of extreme duress, Sofia accessed the final emergency protocol Miguel had taught her, the one he'd made her practice until it became automatic, the one he'd told her to use only in the most desperate circumstances. "Ranger!" she called out, voice cracking with emotion but determination evident in every syllable. "Code Valkyrie." The command activated the highest level of Ranger's protection programming, the combat protocol that had been deliberately suppressed. During his retirement transition, it was a failsafe designed to unlock the full spectrum of his military training, overriding the careful limitations that had been imposed for civilian life. The transformation was immediate and profound. Ranger's entire demeanor shifted, his body language reconfiguring from protective service animal to combat operator. A low, sustained growl emerged, not the warning sound of a threatened pet, but the tactical communication of an elite asset engaging hostiles. Cruz faltered, instinctively tightening his grip on Sofia. "What did you do? What is Valkyrie?" Sofia met his gaze with unexpected steadiness. "It means he's not a pet anymore." Ranger launched forward with explosive power, targeting Cruz with surgical precision. His attack focused on the arm restraining Sofia, teeth closing with calculated pressure on the nerve center of the wrist. The pain response was instantaneous, Cruz's grip involuntarily releasing as his hand spasmed. Sofia dropped to the floor, immediately rolling away as Miguel had taught her during their safety drills. Ranger maintained engagement with Cruz, maneuvering to keep himself between Sofia and her attackers with tactical positioning that spoke. To his specialized training, the tall enforcer raised his weapon, aiming directly at Ranger. "Enough of this. We finish the dog now." What happened next occurred with such speed that later review of the cartel's own recordings struggled to capture the sequence clearly. Officer Mendez, hearing the escalation inside and realizing the operation was compromised, breached the front door with weapon drawn, not to assist the cartel team as planned, but to establish deniability for his involvement should things go wrong. "Police! Everyone freeze!" he shouted, creating instant confusion as the cartel enforcers tried to determine if he was maintaining their cover or actually intervening. In that critical moment of hesitation, Ranger executed what military K9 handlers would recognize as a textbook counteroffensive maneuver. He drove directly into the tall enforcer's legs from the side, a technique specifically designed to unbalance armed opponents without exposing vital areas to potential fire. The enforcer stumbled, his shot going wide and embedding in the ceiling instead of Ranger's skull. Before he could recover his stance, Ranger had already pivoted toward the next most immediate threat, Eduardo advancing on Sofia with a tactical knife now visible in his hand. Officer Mendez, seeing Ranger's aggressive response and seeking to protect himself from potential witness complications, fired a single shot that grazed Ranger's hindquarter. The shepherd faltered momentarily but did not disengage, his training overriding pain response in active threat scenarios. The kitchen had devolved into chaos. 3 cartel enforcers, 1 duplicitous police officer, a combat-trained military, a dog, and a terrified but remarkably composed 8-year-old girl whose selective mutism had temporarily receded in the face of survival imperatives. Sofia used the confusion to execute the movement portion of the emergency protocol, scrambling toward the hallway leading to her grandfather's office. If she could reach the safe room, even without Ranger, the reinforced door would protect her until help arrived. The beacon had been transmitting for nearly 3 minutes now. Captain Torres's response team would be mobilizing. Eduardo noticed her escape attempt and broke away from the main confrontation, pursuing Sofia down the hallway with single-minded focus. "The girl is getting away," he shouted to the others. Ranger, despite his injury, disengaged from the tall enforcer and raced after Eduardo, blood streaking his tan fur but determination undiminished. The shepherd overtook the man just as Sofia reached the office door, lunging at his back with precisely directed force that sent both dog and man crashing to the floor. Sofia slammed the office door shut behind her, hands trembling as she rushed to the bookcase concealing the safe room entrance. The hidden panel required a specific sequence. 3 books pulled in particular order, activating the magnetic lock release. Miguel had made her practice blindfolded, knowing stress would compromise fine motor skills. Outside the office, she could hear the violent struggle continuing. Gunshots, shouts, Ranger's tactical engagement vocalizations that sounded nothing like normal barking. The knowledge that he was fighting, perhaps dying, to buy her these crucial seconds filled her with a devastating mixture of gratitude and guilt. The bookcase swung away from the wall, revealing the steel door of the safe room. Sofia pulled. It opened with all her strength. The reinforced barrier, designed to withstand substantial ballistic impact, moving heavily on industrial hinges. Just as she prepared to enter, the office door splintered inward. Eduardo stood in the threshold, blood streaming from a serious wound on his forearm where Ranger's teeth had torn through muscle. His face was transformed by rage, tactical calculation replaced by personal vendetta. "You're not getting away, little girl," he snarled, advancing into the room. Behind him, Sofia caught a glimpse of Ranger struggling to rise, his hind leg clearly injured from Mendez's shot. The shepherd's determined effort to continue protecting her despite his wound crystallized something in Sofia's mind. A clarity, beyond fear, a certainty that transcended her usual caution. Instead of retreating into the safe room alone, Sofia made a decision that contradicted everything her grandfather had drilled into her. She whistled sharply, the recall signal Miguel had taught her for emergencies. "Ranger, with me!" she called out, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "Code Sierra Echo," the specialized command sequence. Sierra for emergency protection, Echo for retreat and fortify. Penetrated Ranger's combat focus. The shepherd gathered his remaining strength and launched past Eduardo, who was unprepared for the injured animal's continued fighting capacity. Sofia backed into the safe room as Ranger limped rapidly toward her, blood trailing on the office carpet. Eduardo lunged forward in desperate pursuit, but Ranger crossed the threshold first, positioning himself beside Sofia as she slammed the reinforced door shut. The locking mechanism engaged with a solid thunk just as Eduardo crashed against the outer surface. His enraged shouts penetrated faintly through the insulated barrier, but the door held firm, precisely as Miguel had designed it to do. Inside the safe room, Sofia collapsed beside Ranger, her small arms wrapping around his neck as the shepherd's labored breathing filled the confined space. Blood matted his fur, and Sofia could feel the unnatural heat of his wound against her skin. "You're hurt," she whispered, the brief strength that had carried her through the crisis beginning to ebb. "You got hurt protecting me." Ranger leaned against her, his training still active, but pain increasingly evident in his posture. The safe room contained emergency medical supplies, another of Miguel's careful preparations, but Sofia's knowledge of canine first aid was limited to the basics her grandfather had taught her. As adrenaline subsided, the full magnitude of their situation settled over Sofia. They were temporarily secure but trapped. Her grandfather was somewhere outside, potentially heading into an ambush. Ranger needed medical attention that she couldn't adequately provide. And outside the reinforced door, armed men with cartel connections were determined to breach their sanctuary. The emergency beacon had been transmitting for nearly 6 minutes now. Captain Torres had promised Miguel that response time would be under 20 minutes with a direct alert. Sofia glanced at the small surveillance monitor Miguel had installed in the safe room, providing visual coverage of the property's perimeter. No sign yet of Border Patrol vehicles or the helicopter Torres had described in their emergency drills. 14 minutes. They needed to survive 14 more minutes. A dull thud reverberated through the door, the first attempt at forced breach. It was followed by several more in rapid succession, suggesting the use of a battering implement. Miguel had assured Sofia that the reinforced door could withstand substantial assault, but the violence of the impacts still sent waves of fear through her small body. "They're trying to break in," she whispered to Ranger, seeking comfort in vocalization. Despite knowing the dog couldn't respond verbally, Abuelo said the door would hold, but what if it doesn't? Ranger, despite his injury, shifted into a protective position between Sofia and the door, his training evident even in his compromised state. The shepherd's unwavering focus on his protective duty despite personal pain stirred something profound. In Sofia, a recognition of the extraordinary bond they had formed in just 3 months and the remarkable capabilities her pet had concealed beneath his gentle companionship. Sofia reached for the emergency medical kit secured to the wall, determined to help her protector as he had helped her. As she began carefully cleaning Ranger's wound with antiseptic wipes, following the basic first aid steps Miguel had taught her, Sofia made a silent promise. If they survived, when they survived, she would never again underestimate the capacity for courage in herself or in the remarkable dog who had revealed his true nature when it mattered most. Outside the safe room, the cartel operation was unraveling rapidly. The transmission from Sofia's emergency beacon had triggered exactly the response protocol Captain Torres had designed, a multi-agency alert dispatching Border Patrol tactical units, state police aircraft, and federal agents already positioned in the area as part of ongoing cartel interdiction efforts. Miguel, alerted to the emergency by Torres' immediate call to his cell phone, had abandoned his truck on the service road and was approaching his property on foot through the arroyo, guided by Torres via secure communication. His military training, dormant for years, resurged with crystalline clarity as he moved silently through the desert landscape toward the home where his granddaughter fought for survival. But inside the safe room, Sofia knew none of this. She knew only the immediate reality. Wounded protector, vulnerable child, determined attackers, uncertain rescue. As the pounding on the door intensified, Sofia curled protectively around Ranger, offering what comfort she could to the extraordinary animal who had transformed from silent companion to fierce guardian in her moment of greatest need. Captain Daniela Torres was reviewing tactical deployment plans at Fort Bliss when the emergency alert flashed across her secure terminal. The distinctive signature of Sofia's beacon triggered an immediate command center response, screens shifting to satellite imagery of the Alvarez property as communications officers established contact with available units. Time to beacon activation, Torres demanded, already striding toward the equipment room where her tactical gear was stored. 6 minutes, 20 seconds, the communications officer reported. Stable signal, no interruption since initial transmission. Torres processed this information with military efficiency. The beacon's continued transmission meant Sofia had successfully activated the emergency protocol. Whether she'd reached the safe room remained unknown, but the child had at least initiated the alert system as trained. Nearest assets? Torres asked, checking her sidearm with practiced precision. Border Patrol helicopter already airborne can divert to location in 9 minutes. Tactical ground units approximately 15 minutes out. Local sheriff's department has been notified, but the officer hesitated. But we can't rely on them, Torres finished grimly. Potential compromise in local law enforcement was why we established the direct alert system. She made a rapid decision. Scramble the QRF. I want wheels up in 3 minutes. The Quick Reaction Force, a specialized unit Torres had assembled specifically for high-risk extraction scenarios, moved with practiced efficiency, loading gear into the waiting Black Hawk helicopter as Torres established communication with Miguel. The beacon's been active for nearly 7 minutes, she told him over the secure line. Sofia initiated the emergency protocol correctly. I'm approaching from the arroyo, Miguel responded, his voice tight with controlled fear. I can see 3 vehicles at the property, armed men establishing perimeter positions. Do not engage, Torres instructed firmly. Your priority is reaching Sofia and Ranger if possible. If not, secure yourself and wait for extraction. We're airborne in 2 minutes, on site in 11. Ranger's operational status? Miguel asked, using military terminology that revealed his background. Unknown, Torres replied honestly, but if Sofia activated the beacon, we have to assume he implemented protective protocols as trained. The unspoken reality hung between them. Ranger's protection capabilities, while exceptional, were designed to buy time, not overcome a coordinated assault by multiple armed opponents. The Shepherd's primary function in their security planning had been to get Sofia to the safe room, not engage in prolonged combat. Torres ended the call and boarded the helicopter, mind already mapping tactical scenarios. The mission parameters were clear: extract civilians, neutralize threats, secure evidence of cartel operation on U.S. soil. The personal stakes: Sofia's safety, Ranger's survival. She compartmentalized with the discipline of a career officer. As the Black Hawk lifted off, Torres allowed herself one moment of grim reflection. The Morales cartel had made a critical miscalculation in targeting Miguel Alvarez. They had assessed him as a retired engineer living quietly with his granddaughter, an isolated witness whose protection detail had grown complacent over 15 years of inactivity. What their intelligence had failed to appreciate was the elaborate security infrastructure Torres had helped Miguel establish. Not standard witness protection protocols, but military-grade countermeasures designed specifically for this scenario. Sofia's beacon wasn't merely an alert system. It was transmitting real-time locational data for all active communications devices within a 100-meter radius, effectively mapping cartel operative positions for the incoming tactical team. Torres activated her command interface, reviewing this data as it populated her tactical display. 8 hostile signatures clustered in 3 distinct groupings around the property. One signature, likely Officer Mendez, based on movement patterns, operating independently near the front entrance. Multiple communications bursts indicating operational distress. The operation was already unraveling. Torres allowed herself a tight smile as the helicopter accelerated toward the crisis zone. Rafael Morales Jr. was about to discover the difference between targeting civilian witnesses and engaging military response protocols. Inside the safe room, Sofia worked with focused intensity on Ranger's wound, her hands steady despite the continuing assault on the reinforced door. The bullet had grazed the shepherd's hindquarter, tearing through muscle without hitting bone or major vessels. Painful, but not immediately life-threatening if properly treated. The medical kit Miguel had prepared contained specific supplies of a canine trauma, hemostatic gauze designed for military working dogs, antibiotic ointment safe for animal use, and a compression bandage with securing tabs that accommodated fur. Sofia followed the steps Miguel had demonstrated during their emergency drills, her selective mutism temporarily suspended by the imperative to comfort Ranger through the procedure. "This will help stop the bleeding," she explained softly, applying pressure to the wound. "Abuelo showed me how to wrap it tight enough, but not too tight." Her voice provided a focusing point for Ranger, whose training included medical intervention scenarios. The shepherd remained remarkably still despite obvious pain, exhibiting the disciplined response characteristic of elite service animals. Sofia secured the bandage with practiced movements, her small fingers working with surprising dexterity. "There," she whispered, gently stroking Ranger's head. "You were so brave, the bravest dog ever." Ranger's brown eyes remained alert despite his injury. His attention divided between Sofia and the door, where the assault continued with increasing intensity. A particularly violent impact reverberated through the reinforced barrier, causing Sofia to flinch involuntarily. "They really want to get in," she observed, fear creeping back into her voice now that the immediate task of treating Ranger was complete. "The door will hold, right? Abuelo promised it would hold." Ranger responded by pressing closer to her, a behavior he had often exhibited during Sofia's anxiety episodes. The pressure, gentle but firm, activated the same calming response that weighted blankets provided during her sensory overload moments. This intuitive understanding of her needs, even in his injured state, crystallized something fundamental for Sofia. Ranger's protective capabilities weren't separate from his therapeutic. They were extensions of the same extraordinary connection that had helped her emerge from the prison of her selective mutism. Sofia wrapped her arms around Ranger's neck, careful to avoid jostling his injury. "We just have to wait," she whispered. "Captain Torres is coming. Abuelo is coming." She repeated these assertions like a mantra, drawing strength from their certainty. In a situation defined by uncertainty, the surveillance monitor on the safe room wall provided limited visibility of the property's exterior through strategically positioned cameras. Sofia scanned the feeds, searching for any sign of the promised rescue. Instead, she observed the cartel operatives establishing defensive positions around the house, their movements suggesting preparation for confrontation rather than immediate withdrawal. One screen showed a familiar vehicle approaching along the main road, Abuelo's blue pickup truck. Sofia's heart leapt before her analytical mind processed what this meant. Someone else was driving it. The cartel had found her grandfather's abandoned vehicle and was using it as cover for approach. This realization brought a fresh wave of fear. "They have Abuelo's truck," she whispered to Ranger. "But that doesn't mean they have Abuelo, right? He's too smart to get caught." Ranger's ears twitched forward suddenly, his head lifting an emotion Sofia recognized from their quiet evenings. Together, when the shepherd would detect Miguel's return, long before any sound was audible to human ears. But Miguel couldn't possibly be near the house yet, not with armed men establishing perimeter positions outside. A new sound penetrated the reinforced door, not the dull thud of battering attempts, but the sharper report of gunfire. Multiple weapons discharged in rapid succession, followed by shouted commands that Sofia couldn't decipher through the insulated barrier. "Something's happening," she whispered, turning back to the surveillance monitor for clarification. The exterior. Cameras revealed a dramatically altered situation. The carefully positioned cartel operatives were now in disarray, taking cover or returning fire toward an unseen threat beyond the camera's field of view. Two black SUVs accelerated away from the property, their hasty departure suggesting tactical retreat rather than strategic repositioning. Sofia's gaze fixed on one particular screen, where the camera positioned near the arroyo captured a fleeting glimpse of movement, a figure in desert camouflage advancing with military precision toward the house. The angle prevented clear identification, but the methodical approach pattern matched the emergency extraction protocol Captain Torres had once demonstrated when explaining their security measures. "They're here," Sofia breathed, relief washing through her small frame. "The rescue team is here." Ranger confirmed this assessment with subtle changes in his posture, relaxing fractionally from full alert to vigilant observation, his training allowing him to distinguish between the sounds of hostile and friendly forces even through the safe room's insulation. The assaults on the door had ceased entirely, replaced by the distinctive thump of helicopter rotors approaching rapidly. Sofia recognized this sound from their drills. The Border Patrol Black Hawk that Torres had promised would respond to any emergency beacon activation. Ranger's ears pricked forward again, head tilting in the attentive posture that indicated familiar presence. Moments later, a pattern of knocks sounded on the safe room door. 3 quick, 2 slow, 3 quick again. The recognition sequence Miguel had established for emergency situations. "Sofia." Her grandfather's voice, strained but unmistakable, penetrated the barrier. "Sofia, it's safe now, you can open the door." Sofia hesitated, remembering Miguel's explicit instructions. Never open the safe room until receiving both the knock pattern and the verbal confirmation code, regardless of who appeared to be speaking. "What was my mother's favorite constellation?" she called back, utilizing the challenge question they had established. "Cassiopeia," Miguel responded without hesitation, "the queen who sits in the northern sky." The security protocol confirmed, Sophia reached for the interior release mechanism, a reinforced lever designed to be operable by a child's strength. The door swung outward to reveal Miguel kneeling in the office doorway, his clothes dust-covered from his approach through the arroyo, his face lined with worry that transformed to profound relief at the sight of his granddaughter. "Sophia," he breathed, opening his arms. Sophia rushed forward into his embrace, the emotional control that had sustained her through the crisis finally giving way to choking sobs. "They came to hurt you," she managed between tears. "They knew about you. They knew about Ranger." Miguel held her tightly, one hand cradling the back of her head in the protective gesture that had become his instinctive response to her distress. "I know, mi tesoro. I know." His gaze shifted to Ranger, who remained in the safe room doorway, alert despite his injury. "You're both safe now. You did exactly as we practiced." A figure appeared in the office doorway behind Miguel, Captain Torres in full tactical gear, her expression shifting from military focus to visible relief at the sight of Sophia and Ranger intact. "The property is secure," she reported, holstering her sidearm. "Hostiles have retreated or been detained. Medical team is inbound for Ranger." Sophia lifted her tear-streaked face from Miguel's shoulder. "Ranger is hurt," she said urgently. "Officer, Mendez shot him." Torres's expression hardened at the confirmation of Mendez's betrayal. "Mendez has been apprehended," she assured Sophia. "He won't hurt anyone else." She approached Ranger carefully, assessing his wound with professional efficiency. "You did good work with this bandage. Clean application, proper pressure." Her approval brought a flush of pride to Sophia's pale cheeks. "He saved me," Sophia stated. Simply, he fought them all to protect me. "That's what he was trained to do," Torres confirmed, gentle respect evident in her voice. "And it's what he chose to do. Some dogs just follow orders, but the best ones, like Ranger, make decisions. They choose who to protect." Miguel carried Sophia from the office, stepping carefully around evidence of the violent confrontation that had transpired in their home. The living room bore scars of the assault. Furniture overturned, bullet holes in walls, blood staining the kitchen floor where Ranger had engaged the first intruder. A team of Border Patrol agents was already documenting the scene, collecting evidence that would link the attack directly to the Morales cartel. Outside, the property had transformed into a secured operational zone. 2 Border Patrol helicopters maintained position overhead, their searchlights sweeping the surrounding desert for any remaining hostiles. Tactical vehicles established a perimeter, while medical personnel prepared a treatment area for Ranger. The shepherd followed close behind Miguel and Sophia, his injured leg causing a pronounced limp, but his protective vigilance undiminished. Even with Torres and her team securing the area, Ranger maintained his guardian position, a duty that transcended training to become something deeper and more personal. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the veterinary specialist Torres had included in the response team, approached with professional efficiency. "Let's have a look at our hero," she said, kneeling beside Ranger and opening her specialized medical kit. Her gentle hands examined the bandage Sophia had applied, nodding in approval. "This is excellent field treatment. You likely prevented significant blood loss." "Abuelo taught me," Sophia explained, remaining within touching distance of Ranger as Dr. Chen began her examination. "For emergencies." "Well, you're a natural," Dr. Chen assured her, carefully removing the bandage to assess. The wound beneath, The bullet grazed the muscle without damaging major vessels or bone. He'll need proper surgical cleaning and sutures, but this isn't life-threatening. The professional assessment released a tension Sofia hadn't realized she was still carrying. Ranger would survive. This certainty unlocked something that had been building inside her since the moment she had witnessed his transformation from companion to protector. A profound recognition that their bond transcended conventional understanding. Sofia turned to her grandfather, who had not released her hand since their reunion. "Ranger isn't just a retired service dog, is he?" she asked, her analytical mind assembling the pieces of a puzzle whose full picture had been deliberately withheld. "He was placed with us specifically because people might come for you." Miguel exchanged a glance with Torres, both recognizing that the crisis had forced transparency that might otherwise have evolved more gradually. "Yes," he acknowledged, kneeling to meet Sofia's eyes directly. "Captain Torres helped place Ranger with us because of my past work. He needed a home, and we needed the protection he could provide. But we also needed each other," Sofia asserted with unexpected conviction. "He helps me talk. I help him not be scared of loud noises." Miguel smiled gently, recognizing the profound truth in his granddaughter's simple assessment. "That's exactly right, mi tesoro. The best partnerships help both sides." As Dr. Chen administered medication to ease Ranger's pain before transport, Sofia maintained physical contact with the shepherd, her small hand resting on his shoulder in a reversal of their usual dynamic. Throughout her treatment for selective mutism, touch had always flowed from Ranger to Sofia. Pressure applied to calm anxiety, physical presence to ground overwhelming emotions. Now, in the aftermath of crisis, Sofia provided that same grounding presence for her protector. "Will we have to leave our home?" she asked, the question directed to both Miguel and Torres with the directness that characterized her rare verbal communications. Torres knelt beside Miguel, addressing Sofia with the same respect she would afford an adult. "Yes," she confirmed. "This location has been compromised, but we've been preparing a new home for you, a place with even better security, closer to my base of operations." "Will Ranger come with us?" Sofia pressed, her priorities crystalline in their clarity. "Ranger will always be with you," Torres assured her. "He's not just your dog now, he's officially your service animal. His records will be updated to reflect his new primary duty, the support and protection of Sofia Alvarez Martinez." Sofia absorbed this information with visible relief, her hand still resting protectively on Ranger's fur. "He didn't know he was still a working dog until tonight," she observed thoughtfully. "He thought he was retired, but he wasn't confused when I gave the commands. He remembered everything." "Some training never leaves them," Torres explained. "It becomes part of who they are, like muscle memory in athletes. What makes Ranger special is that he can be both your companion and your protector." As the medical team prepared to transport Ranger to the veterinary facility at Fort Bliss, Sofia refused to be separated from him. Miguel supported her decision without hesitation, recognizing that the bond between his granddaughter and the shepherd had been fundamentally transformed by their shared trauma and survival. "We stay together," Sofia stated firmly as they boarded the medical transport helicopter. "Ranger protected me. Now I protect him." In that moment, as the helicopter lifted away from the property that had been both sanctuary and battleground, Miguel witnessed something remarkable in his granddaughter's demeanor, a newfound strength that transcended the courage of crisis response. Sofia had discovered something essential about herself through Ranger's example, that protection flowed in both directions, that even the most vulnerable could become guardians when love demanded it. The selective mutism that had imprisoned Sofia's voice for 3 years had not magically disappeared, but something fundamental had shifted. In defending Ranger, advocating for his care, insisting on remaining with him, she had found a purpose more compelling than her fear of verbal expression. As the helicopter banked toward Fort Bliss, Miguel caught Captain Torres watching Sofia with thoughtful assessment. "She's going to be all right," Torres said quietly, pitched for his ears alone. "They both are." Miguel nodded, his throat tight with emotion as he watched his granddaughter tenderly adjusting the medical blanket around Ranger's injured form, whispering reassurances that the shepherd acknowledged with alert attention, despite his sedated state. "Yes," Miguel agreed, recognizing the profound truth in Torres's simple statement. They saved each other. The helicopter thundered over the desert landscape, its searchlight cutting through darkness as it approached Fort Bliss. Inside, Sofia sat with Ranger's head in her lap, her small fingers gently stroking his fur while Dr. Chen monitored his vital signs. The shepherd's eyes remained fixed on Sofia, despite the sedation, his protective instinct still active even as medication dulled his pain. "His heart rate stabilizes when you talk to him," Dr. Chen observed, noting the correlation on her monitoring equipment. "Keep telling him he's doing well, it's helping." Sofia nodded, leaning closer to Ranger's ear. "You're the bravest dog in the world," she whispered. "The doctors will fix your leg, and then we'll go to our new home together." Miguel watched this interaction with mixture of pride and lingering fear. The night's events had permanently altered their reality. The careful anonymity he had maintained for 15 years had been shattered in minutes, forcing a reckoning with his past that he had hoped to postpone until Sofia was older, stronger, better prepared for the truth. Captain Torres approached, having completed a secure call to her tactical team, still processing the scene at the Alvarez home. 3 in custody, including Officer Mendez, she reported quietly. 4 escaped, but we've identified their vehicles and established roadblocks. Border Patrol has launched drones to track any off-road escape attempts. "And the recordings?" Miguel asked, his voice tense with concern. "Recovered intact," Torres confirmed. "They documented everything, the attack, their intentions regarding Sofia, explicit mentions of Rafael Morales Jr. authorizing the operation. It's enough for federal prosecution under multiple statutes. They'll try again," Miguel stated, not a question but a grim certainty. Torres didn't offer false reassurance. "Yes, they'll try, but not the same way, and not at the same target." She glanced toward Sofia, still focused entirely on comforting Ranger. "The new location is classified Black Echo, highest security protocol, known only to my direct team. Not even entered into Justice Department databases." Miguel absorbed this, understanding the implications. "We're outside the system now." "The system was compromised," Torres replied simply. "This is how we adapted." The helicopter began its descent toward the medical helipad at Fort Bliss, where a specialized veterinary team waited to receive Ranger. Sofia looked up as the aircraft's angle changed, momentary anxiety flashing across her features as she anticipated separation from her protector. "Will I have to leave him?" she asked, addressing the question to both Miguel and Torres. Only during surgery, Torres assured her. "We've arranged adjacent recovery rooms in the K9 medical wing. Your grandfather will stay with you, and you can visit Ranger as soon as the veterinary team clears him." "I need to be there when he wakes up," Sofia insisted, a determination in her voice that brooked no argument. "He needs to see me first, so he knows everything is okay." Dr. Chen smiled gently at this assessment. "That's exactly right, Sofia. Military working dogs like Ranger are trained to account for their handlers immediately after medical procedures. It reduces stress and accelerates recovery if they can confirm their primary person is safe." The helicopter touched down with practiced precision. Medical personnel approached with a specialized stretcher designed for K9 patients as the rotors slowed. Torres stepped out first, establishing security protocols with the waiting tactical team before signaling for the others to disembark. The transition from aircraft to medical facility proceeded with military efficiency. Ranger was carefully transferred to the stretcher, Sofia maintaining physical contact throughout the process. The shepherd remained calm, despite the presence of strangers and medical equipment, stimuli that would typically trigger defensive responses in an injured service dog. "His focus on Sofia is remarkable," Dr. Chen commented to Miguel as they followed. The medical team, most military K9s with his background, would be showing at least some defensive aggression in this scenario, especially after active combat engagement. He's completely recalibrated his protective parameters around her. Miguel watched his granddaughter walking alongside the stretcher, her hand resting on Ranger's flank, her voice offering continuous reassurance. "They recognized something in each other from the first day," he replied. "Something the rest of us couldn't fully see." At the entrance to the surgical suite, the moment of separation arrived. The veterinary team needed to prepare Ranger for the procedure to properly clean and close his wound. Sofia stood at the threshold, reluctance evident in every line of her small body. "Sofia," Miguel began gently, preparing for the emotional response that separation typically triggered in his granddaughter. To his surprise, Sofia squared her shoulders and knelt beside Ranger's stretcher, bringing her face level with the shepherd's. "You have to go with the doctors now," she told him, her voice clear and steady, despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "They're going to fix your leg where the bullet hurt you. I'll be waiting when you wake up, I promise." She pressed her forehead briefly against Ranger's, then stepped back with remarkable composure. "Take good care of him," she instructed the veterinary team. "He saved my life." The head surgeon, a woman with the focused intensity characteristic of military medical personnel, nodded with complete seriousness. "We will, Sofia. He'll receive the same care we provide to any hero under our protection." As Ranger was wheeled into surgery, Sofia turned to her grandfather with unexpected clarity in her gaze. "I need to know everything now," she stated, "about why those men came, about Ranger's real job, about why we have to hide." Miguel exchanged a glance with Torres, who nodded almost imperceptibly. The crisis had forced a reckoning that could no longer be postponed. Sofia had earned the truth through courage beyond her years. "Yes," Miguel agreed, kneeling to meet his granddaughter's eyes. "It's time you knew everything." 3 weeks later, Sofia stood beside Ranger in the enclosed courtyard of their new home, a modified residence on the secure perimeter of Fort Bliss. its unassuming exterior concealing sophisticated security measures. The shepherd moved with increasing confidence on his healing leg, the surgical scar visible, but the muscle function steadily improving under Dr. Chen's careful rehabilitation program. The property had been specifically adapted to their needs, reinforced. Security features disguised as normal architectural elements, direct alarm connections to Torres's tactical team, and specialized accommodations for both Sofia's sensory sensitivities and Ranger's recovery requirements. Miguel watched from the kitchen window as Sofia guided Ranger through the rehabilitation exercises Dr. Chen had prescribed, gentle movements designed to rebuild strength without risking the surgical repair. His granddaughter's formerly halting speech had developed remarkable fluency when directing these sessions, her focus on Ranger's recovery overriding the anxiety that typically constrained her verbal expression. Captain Torres arrived for their weekly security briefing, joining Miguel at the window to observe the pair in the courtyard. His mobility is improving faster than expected, she noted professionally. Dr. Chen thinks he'll regain approximately 95% function in the affected leg. And the rest of the report? Miguel asked, knowing Torres never delivered information piecemeal. Rafael, Morales Jr. has gone dark, Torres confirmed, shifting to security assessment mode. Intelligence suggests he's retreated to a compound near Culiacan after the operational failure. The publicity from the attack has created significant problems for his organization. Federal prosecutors are moving forward with charges against the captured operatives, including Mendez. And the others? Miguel pressed, needing the complete picture. Still at large, but their identities have been confirmed through the surveillance footage Sofia recovered. International warrants have been issued. Torres paused, watching as Sofia demonstrated a stretching technique for Ranger with focused intensity. She's remarkable, Miguel. Most adults wouldn't have maintained the presence of mind to activate the emergency protocols correctly under that kind of stress. She had an extraordinary partner, Miguel replied, pride evident in his voice. They brought out the best in each other when it mattered most. Outside, Sofia had completed the rehabilitation exercises and now sat beside Ranger on a padded mat, her small hand resting on his back as they basked in the afternoon sunlight. The shepherd's posture remained alert, his training still evident in the way he positioned himself to observe the perimeter. But a new contentment balanced his vigilance. We've received approval for the next phase of Ranger's recertification, Torres mentioned, watching the pair with professional assessment. Once his physical recovery is complete, he'll be officially redesignated as Sofia's dedicated service animal, with specialized protection training incorporated into his therapeutic support functions. Miguel nodded, unsurprised by this development. They've already made the transition in every way that matters. The paperwork is just catching up to reality. In the courtyard, Sofia had begun reading aloud from one of her advanced mathematics texts, Ranger listening with the focused attention that had characterized their bond from the beginning. Her voice carried clearly through the open window, confident, steady, unrestrained by the selective mutism that had silenced her for so long. The crisis gave her something her therapy never could, Miguel observed quietly, a purpose greater than her fear. Torres smiled, professional assessment softening into genuine warmth. That's often how healing happens, not by focusing on the wound, but by finding something worth healing for. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Sophia closed her book and leaned against Ranger's solid warmth. The shepherd adjusted his position slightly to accommodate her, his protective instinct now seamlessly integrated with his therapeutic function. In this moment of peaceful connection, with the trauma of their ordeal gradually receding, one truth remained crystalline in its clarity. The silent girl and the retired police dog had saved each other in ways that transcended training, trauma, and words themselves. Their extraordinary bond, forged in quiet understanding and tempered in crisis, had transformed vulnerability into unexpected strength, silence into voice, and isolation into profound connection. Their story wasn't about a cartel's vengeful attack or a dog's heroic defense. It was about two wounded souls recognizing in each other the possibility of wholeness and finding through that recognition the courage to become more than their individual limitations had ever allowed them to. Imagine if this story touched your heart. Please hit the subscribe button and join our community of storytelling enthusiasts. Every week, we bring you powerful narratives that remind us of the extraordinary courage ordinary people and their animal companions can display when facing life's greatest challenges. Share in the comments which moment from Sophia and Ranger's journey resonated with you most deeply, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our next inspiring tale.